So welcome to our Introduction to Practice Areas presented by Summer Associate Hub and Hotshot and sponsored by Proskauer. This is a great way to kick off our Summer Associate Hub virtual programming series where students can learn about practice areas and locations directly with firms and network in breakout rooms. This presentation is one that I wish I had as a 1L and has been very useful for the 1Ls at the schools that we presented on this before. We're also going to have a breakout room hosted by Proskauer after the event. So for those who want to learn more and ask questions, definitely stick around. And we'll also be raffling off a prize sponsored by Proskauer. So don't go anywhere. So you have to be here to win. So stick around. So my name is Albert from Summer Associate Hub. I'm going to scroll down here. Proud to have you all here. And before we jump in, I guess a quick intro about me and what is Summer Associate Hub. So Summer Associate Hub is a free content and resource hub for law students embarking on the 1L and 2L recruiting process. I'm a former law student, a BigLaw associate, as you can see there. We know from our own experience how hard it is as a 1L to understand what it's really like to work at a law firm. Our platform, summerassociatehub.com, has blog posts, podcast episodes, short video tutorials, exercises, interviews with attorneys, and other content to help you learn about practice areas and prepare for the recruiting process. We also host live virtual programs. You know about that because you are on one right now. And students can easily learn directly from and network with law firm attorneys and recruiting team members. We have a ton of awesome programs scheduled for the spring semester, including an entire series of virtual programs where students can learn about practice areas and different cities where they could work in. And each firm in those programs will host breakout rooms for students to network in a smaller setting. We actually just launched that. We have dozens of firms participating. We're going to pop the link in the chat for you to RSVP. We're also in the process of planning an in-person networking opportunities in New York, so stay tuned for that as well. So we'll pop that in the chat to RSVP. To stay updated, the best way to stay updated is to sign up for our newsletter, summerassociatehub.com/newsletter. We'll put that in the chat as well. And if you signed up for this event, you're automatically added to our newsletter. Before I turn it over to Emily to introduce herself, the last thing I'll mention before we move on, we're giving away a free iPad to anyone who has signed up for our newsletter by January 31st. That is tomorrow. So if you signed up for an event, sign up for our newsletter, you're in the raffle. Now, the best part is you get an extra entry for every 1L that you refer. So take the unique link in your confirmation email, pop it in your 1L section group chat, send it to your student groups, send it to your friends. You'll get additional entries. Tomorrow is the last day to earn entries into the raffle, so definitely do that. So I'll be presenting with Emily Gottheimer from Hotshot, a fantastic resource, and I'll turn it over to her to introduce herself and Hotshot.
Thanks, Albert. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Gottheimer. I am a lawyer as well. I practiced in BigLaw in New York City. I did IP law and capital markets work. Currently, I'm the director of content at Hotshot. Hotshot is an on-demand video platform that helps law students become practice ready. We have a website that has short, bite-sized, very practical videos, YouTube-style videos on legal topics, and also on business and technology topics that are very relevant to law students and lawyers. So the whole site is designed specifically for lawyers and law students. For example, if you wanted to know what a bankruptcy lawyer or a litigator or a venture finance lawyer actually does day to day in practice, our website has short videos to teach you. Our content helps students prepare for interviews, prepare for summer jobs, and ultimately for practice. We work with about half of the AmLaw, the top 100 firms in the country, and also top law schools. You guys as students can sign up for a free trial to our website in order to get a sense of our content. There's a discount for students. So I encourage you to check that out as well. The website is hotshotlegal.com.
Great. Thank you, Emily. So before we move on to the program, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Proskauer, and I'll turn it over to Rachel and Erica to, I guess, give us a quick intro about the firm.
Hi, everyone. I turned this off. I didn't know. You don't actually need us for this presentation. So we're like, maybe we'll just go into the subject matter. So Albert took all my lines. I'm Rachel. I'm the director of legal recruiting. And We're not going to take up too much of your time because, like I said, you're not here for us. This is a great opportunity for you to learn all the things that you did not know during, hopefully, your 1L year in law school. I know everyone says like first year is really dedicated towards litigation, and it's hard to know what you want to do when you end up at our firm or another firm. So we're just thankful for the opportunity to make this possible for you guys, the opportunity to hear about different practice groups and know that you don't have to know right now. You should all be taking your 1L summer and your 2L summer to kind of explore all of these options, but this will lay a great foundation for you. Erica and Erica, who's over there on my screen, who's also on the recruiting team, will stay on after the program for a breakout room opportunity to kind of pick the brains of folks in legal recruiting about Proskauer specifically, but also about the process. We know that it promises to be a very hectic recruiting season. To the extent we can offer any words of wisdom from our combined years of recruiting experience, we're happy to do so. So excited to talk to everyone later, and really enthusiastic about this program and the others coming up that we'll be participating in.
Great. Yeah. And Rachel and Erica have a ton of experience. So definitely worth sticking around. I just posted the Zoom link to the chat for everybody for the breakout room. So make sure to save that before you log off the Zoom and use that link to hop in there. And I guess what is the prize we'll be raffling off later on?
What's the prize, Erica? She's
You're
muted,
on-
but I
you're
can
on
read
mute.
her lips, and she said backpack.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, you can read my lips.
I mean, we've
Swag
worked together
bag.
for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
Swag bag. I love it.
Backpack.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And if you want to send me the link for students to sign up to get updates from Proskauer, I can send that in the chat as well.
Awesome.
Great. So thank you, Rachel and Erica.
Thanks.
So I guess let's jump into the presentation. So before we actually go through specific practice areas that are useful to go through, I think Emily and I thought it would be helpful to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the practice areas on a kind of more of a high level. So you might hear a lot of talk about, transactional versus litigation. That's oftentimes the split, especially when you're looking at summer associate opportunities. So this, we don't need to go through all these right now, but this kind of gives a general overview of where these different practice areas fall within that landscape of transactional versus litigation. I guess, Emily, a couple of examples do you want to share any examples from these?
Well, I think the main takeaway, I mean, you can look and see all these different sub areas of litigation on the right, and everything else on the left. I think the main takeaway to understand is that most law firms have this dichotomy, where there's, it's sort of divided in half: litigation on one side, and then what they call transactional groups on the other. Sometimes they're called corporate, sometimes it's litigation corporate, litigation transactional. So it's litigation is subdivided, and then on the transactional side, it's all different practice groups, like you can see there.
Yeah, and litigation is oftentimes mentioned as an umbrella term, like I'm a litigator, but there's so many subspecialties within litigation. We could talk about that a little bit later, but it's important to think about that because an experience as an IP litigator would be very different from an appellate litigator versus someone who's doing white collar investigations or criminal litigations. That's something to keep in mind. And then there are some areas that straddle both, and that's something that's important to keep in mind, especially if you're somebody who think you'd enjoy both types of practices. So antitrust, data privacy, some of those other areas in the middle straddle both transactional and litigation. And that could be interesting for a lot of people. And then a couple areas you might see outside of this, just to mention, IP prosecution is a good example. There are a couple practice areas that aren't necessarily transactional or litigation, and they might be different. So IP prosecution is mostly, counseling and filing for patents and trademarks. That wouldn't necessarily be squarely within either bucket, but it's definitely a large practice area and something to know about.
Right.
So I think when you're thinking about choosing a practice area, thinking about what might be interesting to you, it's important to think about kind of generally what that type of experience would be like. And we kind of put together this table to look at generally what transactional experience is like versus a litigation experience. I guess I'll start off with a couple points about to start. Transactional is a little bit less adversarial. This is one thing that attracted me to transactional work. The parties are working together toward a common goal. There's a lot of camaraderie when you're doing an M&A deal, which we'll talk about, or reaching some sort of agreement. And usually at the end of that, both parties are happy. They did some sort of transaction. Maybe a company was acquired, something else. Litigation, on the other hand, is obviously more adversarial. So both parties are probably unhappy to be in litigation, and then figuring that out. Transactional work, it could be fast-paced, which is fun, but also can also be, obviously fast-paced. It's unpredictable. You're oftentimes working with different deadlines that are oftentimes changing just based on the details of that deal. Litigation, on the other hand, is usually based on the timelines that are set by the parties and set by the court. So you oftentimes know when a filing deadline is coming up, or when the discovery needs to be wrapped up based on how the parties agreed. Emily, do you want to take a couple others here?
Sure. The third line, I think, is a big one. So your day-to-day as a junior litigation associate is typically a lot of researching and writing. So you'll be sitting in your office, you're researching case law, drafting briefs, drafting sections of briefs and memos. There's not a lot of that on the transactional side. It's much more, you're looking at contracts, you're negotiating with the other party. You're doing diligence, which is basically like a huge fact-finding process. So you're digging through records and you're reviewing those. So it's a very different, the nature of the work is very different. If you'd like to write a lot, you might be more suited for litigation, for example. So those are the kinds of questions to ask yourself, about your personality and your interests. The life cycle, the bottom line on this chart. So this is, sort of what I was touching on the litigation side, the life cycle of a case. You're doing a lot of document review, which is sort of the litigation equivalent of due diligence, where you're reviewing tons and tons of documents, just reading them over, trying to find something interesting. Again, research, writing, motion writing, preparing, helping the more senior lawyers prepare for witness meetings and preps and depositions and things like that. You probably will not be going to court, like you see on TV. Litigation practice does not involve a lot of court work when you're a junior associate, so that's very important to know. On the deal side, on the left of this chart, like I said, you're doing a lot of diligence, you're coordinating with other parties over little pieces of a huge agreement that you're passing around, and you're collecting feedback, negotiating with the other side, with the other parties, with the banks, with their lawyers and things like that. So it's a very different, the nature of the work is very different.
And I think Emily's point about litigation is a key one. I mean, I think the statistic is less than 5% of cases actually go to trial. So the idea that, people want to do litigation because they want to get up in court and argue, that's obviously one part of litigation, but it's a very small part, especially within the big law experience. And a lot of litigation is happening behind the scenes, writing, researching, coordinating with the other parties, with your colleagues, and different activities like that, which is also interesting, but it's different from getting up in court and actually arguing cases.
I think litigation work is more intellectual than transactional work, so you're really like parsing through issues and research and, coming up with arguments, for the briefs and the memos and all that. Whereas, deal work is not really super intellectual. There's strategy involved, of course, but it's a different type of thinking.
Are you saying transactional lawyers aren't intellectual? I'm like, oh no. No, just kidding. Just a quick disclaimer before we move on. These are just general differences. Obviously, these differences vary based on firm, the specific sub-practice, specific matter you're working on. But we just wanted to give kind of generalization of what the experience is like between transactional and litigation. So just moving on to this next slide. And like I said, before we jump into actual examples, we thought these are really important considerations to think about as you listen to the presentation, and as you go through the recruiting process and networking over the next few months of meeting attorneys at firms, doing interviews, thinking about what areas might excite you. So one consideration is do you like this, in terms of choosing a practice area, do you like this area of law or industry? Does it excite you? To me, this is the number one most important consideration by far. Oftentimes I'll talk to law students or talk to junior attorneys, and they'll explain how they're interested in a certain field because they think it'll give them good opportunities over the long term, and it'll help them maybe potentially leverage their network. And my question to them is always, that's really nice, but do you like it? Is it interesting to you? Because if it's not interesting to you, it's not going to it's not it's not going to become a good area for you. But if something's interesting to you and it excites you, there's usually a way for you to figure out how to make that successful for you. So that I think is the number one factor in terms of thinking about a practice area. Another one is, what do you want your day-to-day experience to be? And what do you want kind of the cadence of your work life to be? And I think the previous slide was helpful in thinking about that. Do you like when things are fast-paced and unpredictable, and that it's fun when you're willing and dealing and kind of doing stuff on the fly and coordinating with people? Maybe you'd be more suited as a transactional lawyer. Do you like kind of quiet time, really mastering a subject, getting deep in the weeds of something, intellectually stimulating and writing, and less kind of going through stuff and stuff changing on the fly? Then maybe you'd be more suited for litigation, right? So in terms of thinking about an area, even if an area excites you, you want to make sure that that would fit with your personality and the way that you want your work life to be. And then another consideration is exit opportunities. And it's kind of hard to think about that as a 1L. So we don't want to spend too much time on this, but it is important to think about. For example, some areas have a lot of exit opportunities between law firms and in-house. Maybe that might include IP tech transactions and commercial contracts, general corporate work, data privacy. All of those are very in-demand, in-house areas. Areas like bankruptcy, for example, you wouldn't find a ton of bankruptcy in-house roles. It's usually when companies are in distress, so that it could be a problem. But obviously bankruptcy might have a lot of opportunities within law firms. So you want to think about what your long-term goals are and see if you could align an area that excites you within your long-term goals. Huge disclaimer there that your long-term goals will probably change. If you ask me what I'd be doing in my career 7 years out of law school, I don't know if I would have predicted this. And I think careers are funny and they go in different ways. So thinking as a 1L that you are dead set on a certain long-term goal, it's important to put in perspective that could probably change.
Yep.
All right. So Emily, ready to jump into this?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to be using this as a kind of an example deal that we're going to kind of run through different stages of a deal, different parts of a deal. So this theme will run throughout. So hopefully this will be a fun way of everyone getting a sense of what it's like to work on a matter within a law firm and the different areas that are involved. So in this example, so Chief International is interested in acquiring Niner Corporation. I think the theme has become obvious, hopefully for many, and has engaged Arrow LLP as their law firm to help negotiate the transaction. So Chief and Niner signed what's called a letter of intent, an LOI, which is non-binding, but it's just a way for the parties to align on the basic terms of the deal. And Kelsey asks Levi LLP, Kelsey's, I should have been Arrow, Levi LLP, which is another one of the law firms, Niner's attorneys, to provide Niner's key agreements, corporate documents, employee information, all different types of things they have to disclose as part of due diligence. So that's the CEO of Chief International there, the beloved Andy Reid. And if you know why Arrow and Levi are the law firms, if you get that one, pop it in the chat, pop it in the Q&A. All right, so let's get started. So I guess one thing to keep in mind when thinking about a deal is actually how the deal process works. So to start off on that, we're actually going to share a quick video from Hotshot just so you can get a sense of what Hotshot actually is, and to see it in real life, we're going to play a short video. I'm actually going to have to redo the screen share for this. Super quick. All right, so this is a really helpful video about the M&A process from Hotshot.
The M&A group at a law firm acts as the project manager for a deal, and a lawyer from the group is usually the main point of contact for the client. The deal lawyers also coordinate a variety of other people in organizations, such as bankers, accountants, lawyers, and law firms from different states and countries. The deal lawyers also work with specialist practice areas, such as real estate, tax, and employment, based on the needs of the deal.
Great. Yeah. So as they said in the video, the corporate M&A team is usually the one actually, quarterbacking the deal and then working with the different specialist groups to move that process along. So here are the two M&A partners at the two law firms, Arrow and Levi. The reason that those two are the partners is because they're the quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes and Brock Purdy, in the Super Bowl. So the perfect example there, kind of working as the quarterbacks coordinating that deal. Emily, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, let me just back up 1 second. When I was a 1L or even a 3L, I definitely didn't know what M&A was. So just to level set here a bit, M&A stands for mergers and acquisitions, and that is the practice area in a firm. It's often a big or influential practice area in a firm that represents companies that are where one is acquiring, a company is buying another company. Like when Amazon bought Whole Foods a few years ago, that's an example of an acquisition. It's an acquisition. They acquired Whole Foods, or when two companies merge, like two airlines, joining together, something like that. So that's an M&A deal. And as Albert was saying, these are large deals for a law firm. They often involve all the different practice groups at a firm, or many of them. And so the deal lawyer, the M&A associate, kind of runs the show and coordinates with all the other lawyers, like the quarterback. So now we're going to go through and talk about how all the different practice areas would get involved in this deal that Albert set up with the football teams.
Yeah, and the way that would work, I was a tech transactions IP licensing attorney, and the way this would work in real life as a specialist is, you would get an email from the corporate team saying, hey, we have this deal, can you here's the details of it, here's the background on the different parties involved, here's some materials that you could review to get familiar with the deal, and can you get started looking at these documents or looking at these things, and they'll email the IP team, the data privacy team, the real estate team, the tax team, etc., and everyone will work on their piece of the pie and then coordinate with corporate as kind of the hub in terms of gathering everybody's comments, everyone's feedback throughout the process. So let's move on to the next one. So let's start with a question and a hypothetical. So in order to afford to acquire Niner, Chief, the company buying Niner, needs to borrow $50 million. So Chief is also exploring having a private equity fund invest in the deal and contribute an amount to finance the acquisition. So giving the private equity fund the ability to, I guess, acquire a piece of the company with Chief. So which practice group at Arrow would help with this step? So we're going to try to set up a poll here, and feel free to contribute in the poll. But does anyone have an idea? As you think about this one, kind of who would be involved in this part of the deal. Let's see if we can get this poll set up. Can everyone see that? All right. So we're getting a lot of A, a lot of C. Yeah, so mostly A and C. So yeah, the answer is both. Mostly A, but both, right? So in order to to think about this, the Chief needs to negotiate the loan agreement for the $50 million, and the corporate finance and lending team would definitely be helping with that. So the corporate team would loop in, that team, and they would work together to help the client finalize that transaction, kind of in the shadow of this M&A deal. The private funds team would also be involved, likely if a private equity fund is involved in investing in this deal, but this is mostly a lending transaction. Yeah. All right, so good job to everyone who got that one right. All right, so let's move on to the next example. So Niner provided its key agreements with customers and vendors. So all the agreements they have with their different customers or suppliers. They had to provide those in a folder for the team to review as part of the due diligence process. So Arrow wants to review these as part of due diligence to make sure there are no red flags. So which practice group should the Arrow corporate team loop in to help with this one? I'm thinking about this one. Let's see. just launched a poll. We'll keep it quick. Yeah, so a lot of B. Nicely done. So this wasn't an easy one. Yeah, so this is tech transactions and IP licensing. So common agreements include here, customer agreements, technology or trademark licenses, partnership agreements, joint development agreements, all different types of agreements that the target company that's being acquired might have with different customers and vendors. This also might include, patents, copyrights, and trademark review. Actually looking at the IP assets. One thing to mention here is about data privacy and cybersecurity. At many firms, data privacy is within the tech transactions group because of how intertwined those two areas are. So you might see the tech transactions group also doing data privacy related diligence, and that could include looking at the company's data privacy and cybersecurity practices, looking at maybe a cyber breach that they might have had in the past, looking at their privacy policies, different things like that, and that could be included within that. At some firms, it's a separate group, and it's important. These kind of nuances are important. So as you're interviewing with firms, thinking about firms, networking, asking that question of like, what does the diligence include? You might get a sense of whether or not that's something you want to do as part of your practice, or if it's completely bifurcated outside of that.
Yeah, I'll just add that data privacy and cybersecurity are very hot areas right now, which means that there's a lot of jobs in those practice areas right now. And basically, anytime you have an area of the law that's changing a lot, there's going to be a lot of need for legal work and a lot of need for those kinds of lawyers.
Yeah, it's an exploding area with a lot of new laws coming out of different states. So it's a great point. Yeah. Okay, cool. So next example. So Chief is considering the best way to structure the acquisition. So they know they want to buy the company, just not sure exactly how to structure it. There's a lot of different ways. There could be a merger. We don't need to get into details of what these mean right now, but it could be a merger of equals. It could be where one company is actually acquiring the shares of another company and literally just buying the shares. It could be where another company is just buying the assets of another company. So that's something they're thinking about. And also Niner has a complicated setup in place for stock options and equity awards, which is a common thing to issue to employees and executives. And there's some common triggers in the event the company is acquired. So which practice group would the corporate team be looping in to help with this step? So we'll keep this one quick also, if you want to vote. Let's see. Yes, we're getting a lot of A, a little bit of C, less than I expected, but the answer is both. So, the deal structure is often driven by what is most tax efficient. That's usually a big part of the calculus. So looping in the tax team from the outset is pretty common. Figuring out that puzzle in terms of how to structure the deal. For equity awards and stock options specifically, this would definitely be something that the employee benefits and executive compensation team would help out on. That's also a piece of the tax code, and usually executive compensation practice is tax driven, and they're masters at that particular subset of the tax code. But at most firms, these groups are separate. So the tax team is a general tax team that advises on tax considerations that might, related to M&A transactions, real estate transactions, different types of things that might involve have tax implications. And the employee benefits and exec comp, as oftentimes it's called, would be a separate group that focuses particularly on those issues. Sometimes it is the same group, and similar to the last example, it's important as you go through the process to understand with a firm what exactly does the tax practice include. Does that include executive compensation if it's interesting to you, or vice versa?
Tax law is very interesting. It's very detailed, very rule-based, very technical, very analytical. So, people who like tax law tend to love tax law. People who aren't interested in it, it's kind of the last thing that they would want to do. If you think you might be interested in tax law, it's a good thing to test out in law school, because you could take a tax course and see how it feels.
That's a great point. And tax law from kind of universities refer to as kind of like solving a puzzle. And a lot of people who enjoy tax laws because they like the idea of kind of being looped in on a deal like this and saying, hey, we need to figure out how to structure the acquisition in the best way possible for our client. Can you help us with that? And then you're really getting in the weeds and figuring out the best way to structure that, and kind of solving that puzzle. And oftentimes it involves pretty creative thinking in terms of how to structure it in a way that's favorable, but at the same time not in violation of obviously of the tax law. So, like Emily said, it's an area that appeals to a lot of people, but for some people, it's less appealing. But it's definitely there's definitely a lot to like about it, and it's a popular area. Okay, so moving on to the next example. So it turns out a large part of Niner's value is that it owns most of the warehouses and office locations, which is a very valuable thing. So which practice group would they be looping into to help with this one? Yeah, so a lot of D here, which makes sense. Yeah, so it actually I don't think Zoom allows you to choose two answers. So it's actually D and half of A. So of course, you know, if Niner owns its warehouses and office locations, you know, the real estate team would be looped in to help with that. And what that might include as a real estate associate who's being looped in on a merger or acquisition to help on the real estate side, you might be due diligence for, you know, checking the title, the proper title for the property. Does the company actually own the property with the right chain of title? That there's no issues with that? Are there any liens on the property? Meaning, are there any loans or anything where the property is used as collateral, like a mortgage? Are there any other items for the warehouses and locations as part of due diligence? That oftentimes includes an environmental analysis, which is why A is also highlighted there. So there might be a separate team at the firm that does environmental work. That might be something that the real estate team handles, but looking at environmental analyses for those properties is very important, of course, for any red flags. It's important to keep in mind here, real estate law is oftentimes a standalone practice. So it's not purely a specialist on a merger acquisition, you know, like some other groups are. So real estate practice at a firm very often would include an entire standalone practice where that group handles acquisitions of real estate, selling real estate, you know, actual property, buildings. Oftentimes, a large part of that is lending, you know, different types of loans that against real estate. So it's really important if you like real estate and you want to become a real estate attorney at a big firm, it's really important to go a level deeper, especially in a practice like real estate. Go a level deeper to understand what that practice is. Does it include a lot of what they call dirt law, which is buying and selling actual property? Does it include a lot of lending? Is it a mixture of both? Is it a lot of M&A support, which is the example that we gave here? If you want to be a real estate attorney doing acquisitions, going to a firm that does purely M&A support as a real estate practice might not be the best fit. But if you're interested in M&A deals and you're interested in doing that type of thing, then maybe it is, right? So it's really important to go a level deeper when it comes to this type of practice. Move on to the next one.
Yeah, I guess the one little point I might add is about environmental law. If you're interested in environmental law and you want to go to a firm, just keep in mind that the firms typically represent, you know, the big companies that, you know, the big oil companies, the big gas companies, you know, those companies that can pay huge bills. So that's something I think that environmental lawyers sometimes get like disheartened about. So it's good to know.
Yeah, it's a good point. All right, so moving on to the next example. Let's see. So fast forward 2 years, the acquisition was completed. Chief bought Niner, and everyone's happy. And it turns out it was significant growth for Chief, and now they decided to become a publicly traded company. So which practice group at this point would be working on the IPO, as it's called, which we'll explain in a second? Yes, we're getting a lot of C, which is exactly right. And a little bit of D, but definitely mostly C. So Chief would be issuing what's called an IPO, which is an acronym you're going to hear thrown around a lot if you're talking to capital markets attorneys throughout the process. And that stands for initial public offering. And that's when a company basically goes public. They raise capital by issuing shares to the public markets. You know, the high profile version of that is when they go to the New York Stock Exchange and ring the bell. You know, that's usually when a company IPOs. So the capital markets team at a firm is also usually a standalone practice where they would handle all different types of public issuances to raise money, whether that's an IPO for stock or, you know, raising debt from the public. And that you know, that group would of course work with corporate, you know, on something like this where it might be intertwined with a deal or something like that. But generally, it's a standalone practice to help clients, you know, move through the stages to then become a publicly traded company.
Capital markets lawyers, I think capital markets issuances, deals, the matters that you'd work on are often large in the way that an M&A deal can be large, and you're sort of the quarterback as well, working with all the other different practice areas that support an IPO, for example.
Yeah, and one thing about capital markets practice that's interesting to a lot of people is that it really requires you to understand the business on a pretty deep level. A big part of capital markets practice is public filings. So filing with the public about risks that the business might be facing, the financial statements, descriptions about different things, making sure the company is compliant of disclosing material changes to their business. And you really have to know the industry and the business pretty well to make sure that you're disclosing that information correctly. So those who really enjoy capital markets work, at least from what I experience with my colleagues, is because of really being excited about being entrenched in their business and understanding it kind of front to back. If that's you, then that could be an interesting practice area for you.
It's also another point is that if you're a capital markets lawyer at a firm with a big capital markets practice, as a junior associate, you might have one matter on your plate for 3 or 4 months. Whereas if you're a specialist in the tax group or an IP group, for example, you might have 10 matters on your plate because you have a small piece of a lot of different deals, as opposed to the lion's share of just one. So that's something to think about, which of those options sounds more suited to you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that brings us back to the point about just how the corporate team coordinates with the different specialists. And oftentimes, especially for corporate M&A, you might be on maybe 1, 2, 3 deals at once, and you're often pretty involved in all aspects of that deal. As a specialist, you're really only working on one piece of that pie. It could be a big piece and it could be a small piece. So sometimes you're on several deals at once. And if you enjoy doing a lot of different things, and that could be great if it's interesting to you. If you enjoy more so kind of getting deeper into one thing, then maybe, like you said, capital markets or corporate M&A could be more interesting. So moving on to the next one. So fast forward 3 years after the acquisition, Chief discovers a major issue with Niner. So it turns out they're not so happy. And some of the statements they made in the agreement turned out to be false. And those are called representations or reps, where a company in an agreement would be making different statements that have to be true in that agreement. And if it turned out not to be true, there could be liability. You'll hear a lot of attorneys talk about negotiating reps. So which practice group at Arrow would be working on this, you think, after they find out that some of these representations were false? Yeah, so we're getting a lot of C and some D. So it's actually mostly D and a little bit of A. I could see why maybe that was confusing for C. So that's actually a good reason for us to bring up the differences between different subspecialties within litigation. So when Chief is exploring options to bring a breach of contract claim against Niner, they're going to want to have the general litigation team involved to figure out options, potentially litigating to recoup its losses that it might have suffered from those false statements. So as you finish one semester of 1L, probably familiar with some differences between civil litigation and criminal litigation. And this would be a civil litigation matter where Chief would be potentially thinking about litigation against Niner or against particular people at Niner, or the people who sold the Niner business to them for making those false statements. This is a good reason for us to talk about a few subspecialties within litigation. So within the umbrella of litigation, another subspecialty is white collar investigations, which a lot of big law firms have, and something you might encounter throughout the networking process. That's focused on criminal matters, where somebody might have made a fraudulent statement in a public disclosure or in a particular legal matter or deposition or something like that. Whether it's accounting fraud or securities fraud, or so a related matter like that. That's usually it's a criminal matter where the government would actually be going after that company or that person, and you'd be helping think about how to handle that investigation, representing those clients in terms of a criminal matter brought by the government. So this case would actually be a civil matter. It's more of a general litigation, and the misstatements and the misrepresentations that you're thinking of would be In the white collar context would be more of a public disclosure that might result in a criminal matter. A couple other subspecialties of litigation is IP litigation. At many firms, this is a completely different practice area because it's so specific to the practice of litigating patents and sometimes trademarks. Because of how different that is from general litigation, oftentimes firms have that as a completely separate practice group. Other areas of litigation, might include labor and employment. Which would deal with all different issues that come up with employees and labor unions. Antitrust litigation, which would be working on, defending companies against antitrust claims brought by the government, alleging a monopoly, maybe trying to block a merger, saying that the merger is going to cause a monopoly. The JetBlue Spirit merger that didn't happen is a good example of that from last week. So those are some other examples of within litigation that are usually specialties at a firm that are separate from the general litigation group. All right, so last example before we wrap up. So the 7 years later, the acquisition, after the acquisition was completed, new companies have come out with better stuff. Chief has kind of failed to evolve, and the business has been in a slow decline. So Chief cannot pay one of its large loans that's becoming due. So who do you think would be working on this? Yeah, so a lot of C. That's exactly right. This would be a bankruptcy matter. So a likely option for Chief if they can't pay off their debts is exploring bankruptcy or restructuring. And oftentimes other practices are involved in this as well. So for example, the M&A team might be exploring the best options for Chief to sell itself to someone else, in distress. Corporate finance might be helping to explore borrowing options to keep the company afloat. All different groups kind of involved in this type of thing, but it's definitely a bankruptcy-driven matter to help think through the different options the company might have. With that, anything to add for bankruptcy, Emily?
Just that it's good to know when you're researching firms that bankruptcy groups are often called restructuring at a firm. It's like a broader term.
Yeah, that's true. And one thing to keep in mind, I think bankruptcy, it's similar to tax in that it's completely driven by the statute. So the bankruptcy lawyers are masters in the bankruptcy code. The entire practice revolves around understanding the nuances of the bankruptcy code. So if you're somebody who likes to master a topic, who enjoys actually mastering a piece of law versus just negotiating or coordinating, bankruptcy could be a really interesting practice for you. Especially if similar to capital markets, you have to know a lot about the business, the details of the business, and that could be a really good practice if you like the area, if you like getting involved in the details of the law, but also understanding a business and an industry at a pretty deep level.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's pretty much, kind of a quick examples of a few different areas. Some quick takeaways before we move on to finishing the session, and of course, anybody who wants to join Proskauer's breakout room. This is not an exhaustive list of law firm practice areas. We just covered, several, but that's obviously not an exhaustive list. So it's important to keep in mind there's a lot of other stuff out there. You could obviously check out summerassociatehub.com. We have all different practice area overviews to get a good view of some of those areas, including some that we didn't talk about here. Practice areas can look very different between big law firms and also between big law firms, mid-sized firms, boutique firms, solo practitioners. So it's something to keep in mind that even if you're excited in an area, it's important to go a level deeper to understand what a particular firm's practice actually looks like. And then, the best way to learn about a practice area is to hear directly from someone who practices in that area. That's the best advice you could have is going through the recruiting process. I know our summerassociatehub.com site has different interviews with attorneys, our virtual programs like this that we're going to have throughout the rest of the spring, where we're going to have attorneys on panels is a great way to do that, to hear directly from them. So definitely keep in mind through the process that no matter how much you read about an area or listen about an area, it's important to actually talk to people who work in that area to get a sense of what their day-to-day is like. Anything, Emily, anything from you before we conclude?
No.
All right. Great. So I guess we'll if we have any questions. But I want to make sure we're being mindful of time. One quick question: Does exec comp overlap with labor and employment? I would say generally the answer is no within firms. Exec comp is usually a transactional, tax-driven. It's a very good question. It's usually a tax-driven transactional practice that's kind of deep in the details of stock options, equity awards, things like that are oftentimes triggered by an M&A deal or helping a startup think about those issues when they're issuing. Labor and employment is usually mostly a litigation and counseling practice, where you're dealing with different issues around, maybe retaliation, harassment, unsafe work environment, dealing with labor unions and the issues that can come up with that. So it's usually a different practice, but that's a very good question. And
So I
oftentimes also
will,
more
Albert, this is my one time I will chime in.
Please.
At Proskauer, employee benefits exec comp is a combination of lawyers in our tax department and our labor department. It's like a Venn diagram of the two. So you can sit in our employee benefits exec comp practice center, either under the tax department or under the labor department, depending which side of the work you do.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this is why we have you.
That's my value add for the day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Great. Well, we're gonna do a quick raffle before we wrap up and move on to the breakout room. Does that work?
Sure.
All right. So I'm just gonna open up the chat. I'm just gonna pop this link one more time. So if you want to join the raffle for free, a free swag bag from Proskauer, there's the link. This is your last chance. You have about 30 seconds to enter your information in that form. In the meantime, while we wait for that, just to give you a sense of what you could leverage to continue research in this area, learning in this area. So for Hotshot, you can get 30% off Hotshot through Summer Associate Hub because we're friends. So visit summerassociatehub.com. You can go to the different practice area overviews, and within each overview, you'll see a bunch of videos from Hotshot that are super helpful. You'll see a promo code there. You can watch 3 videos for free and then get the 30% off of the rest. It's very affordable. I think if with the 30% off, it's probably under $50 for the entire year of content for a law student. And if you use your school email address, it'll automatically be free if your school already signed up. So if your school already signed up for Hotshot, then they very nicely already paid for that for you. So use your school email address. Emily, anything to add on that plug?
Well, would you mind putting our website into the?
Yes, let's do it. Yep.
Thanks. Hotshotlegal.com.
Hotshotlegal.com. Yeah, we sent it earlier. I'll send it again right now, so everyone has it. Hotshotlegal.com. So check it out.
Yep.
Great. And then, like I said before, refer your newsletter to one else. Tomorrow is the last chance to do it. So go to your confirmation email, copy your unique referral link, send it to your friends, to your 1L classmates, and we'll be raffling off a free iPad this week after the 31st. All right, so let's get to the raffle. All right, so we're gonna generating this now. So you have to be here to win. Mark Fredrickson, are you here? Let us know in the Q&A if you're here. All right, raise his hand. Very good. All right, you're here. Well, congratulations. We'll get you set up with that. And we're gonna pop the link one more time in the chat. So this is your last chance to get the link to Proskauer's Zoom room. So Rachel and Erica are very nicely going to stay for a few minutes to chat with folks and provide some more insight into the summer program and how Proskauer's different practice areas work together. Just some insights, just like Rachel gave about labor and employment. We'll get some good insights there. So there's the Zoom link. Copy and paste that before the Zoom ends. And here on the slide is some details about our virtual series that's coming up. You could sign up at summerassociatehub.com/events, and Proskauer will be a part of many of these. So definitely join to see Proskauer and a lot of other firms throughout the spring semester. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully you learned something tonight, and thank you Proskauer for sponsoring, and hope you join us in the breakout room afterwards.
Thanks. See you all shortly.
Thanks, everybody.